Let's get started here. We got much here. We're so happy to have you here and coffee at the end. We got Bill Schwab today, and you know it's going to be an amazing presentation. I think you know what's.
I don't know. No, I don't. No, this is great. I know Rob. Sweet. Fans of coffee and cinnamon rolls.
Arts director, we got Lisa back there. It's like always runs these, and really grateful for her for all her technical expertise to get this up and running smoothly, because there's also a Zoom, and so if you know somebody didn't get to see the talk, and so I'm glad see it, see the recording of it. So I just want to thank the members who make these copies at 10. Is it coffee at 10 or coffee at 10? What do you think? Coffee at 10. Okay, coffee at 10. And also, of course, our sponsors who made this space if that's possible.
It's beautiful.
So we're really grateful for all of them. Grateful for your day. So I just have a brief introduction to Bill. He's been a photographer and publisher for over 4 decades.
Yeah.
And you're going to learn something about his family history too.
Yeah, me too.
So totally fascinating. I'm so excited.
No spoilers.
Yeah, his work is in private and corporate collections all over the world. In addition to his work as a photographer through these Northlight photographic workshops, he facilitates classes in several photographic processes at his Northern Michigan facility. And if you want to know more about that, Rob Harold just spent last week doing some amazing workshops there, so you get like a personal perspective. All kinds of amazing, like what I've seen about Bill is that he has his expertise in traditional photographic processes, but also with like digital integration. So his expertise really spans, I'm going to say centuries now.
Yeah.
So
3 centuries.
and then in addition to that, he leads expeditions to Iceland, and he's got an expedition coming up probably April of 2025. I can ask him more about that later in North Wales. And where is, how do you say, Snowdonia?
Oh, the Snowdonia, it's the new name, the new Welsh name for the Snowdonia was a national park there, and like a lot of things there, the Welsh is coming back out in them. Yeah.
So anyway, that's another trip, amazing photographic trips. I've seen some of the work that comes out of these trips, and it's amazing, like the combination of Bill's guidance and these tremendous places and great land. Like it's got to be an amazing experience for photographers.
They're fun.
So also he hosts a photo stock festival. You can ask him, maybe you can talk about that. So
Yes.
Talk about that. Photographers come from all over the place. Rob was telling me about a daguerreotypist that came from New York that was there with his expertise. So it's really an amazing event that's full of art and history and technical instruction and camaraderie and everything. So that's an annual gathering of photographers, collectors, and enthusiasts. In 2005, he founded Northlight Press with the intention of independently supporting and publishing the work of emerging as well as established photographers, and has published several titles to date. You can talk about that.
Yeah, sure.
I won't talk too much about it, but
Sure.
he recently launched under his Northlight Press label a new series titled the 11+ Signature Series, and I think this is like an amazing format. Like it's brilliant. A series of small unlimited edition books that contain 11 reproductions and 1 original.
Right.
So, and that's the Signature Series. So he'll talk more about that. And also he's got a workshop coming up in October, this coming October, called Getting Over Platinum.
Yeah, it's a gum over platinum course. I'll talk about that as well. Great.
So I will just.
Wow, I'm tired. Let's listen to that. Thank you very much, Sheila. Thanks. And thanks to everybody here at Crooked Tree. It's such a wonderful place. And I am really honored to be part of this show as well. And I hope you maybe seen the images over here. You'll see some of them in the talk tonight. Yeah, it's been a long time, a career, I guess. And it's kind of exhausting just hearing Sheila say everything about that. And I wasn't really going to talk much about other things, but I do run this event up here called Photo Stock that I've been running since 2006. And it's been quite successful. Rob is there, I think Rob is just the one person that's been. But what I do every year is up in Cross Village, I bring some notable photographers as well as some emerging photographers here for workshops and for people to hear them talk about their process and talk about their work. And this year we had a guy named Jerry Spagnoli, who's quite well known in the documentary world because he uses the very first photographic process to do that, the daguerreotype. And anyway, and we've had people over the years, all kinds of notable people over the years, and we will again next year. So it's always at the solstice up here, and you can get onto my subscription list by oh, hi Heidi. You can get on my subscription list by going to my website at billschwab.com. And I do all kinds of things, and I try to base them up here. Unfortunately, not many people here participate. It's more people come from other parts of the world and other parts of the country. So I'd like to have more people locally involved as well. So look for that next year. And I also do workshops up at my place up in outside of Cross Village. I have a facility up there that we do a lot of different processes. And like Sheila was saying, I span centuries. I mix digital digital negatives and digital process along with 19th century processes and make some new things that are really quite nice. But anyway, let's get down to what I'm talking here about Detroit. And being part of this show has been really special. I mean, this, you know, had they had 10 times the size, this there could have been so much in this show. And they've done such a nice cross section of things that are Michigan. You know, there's the music, there's the beauty of Michigan, and then what I'm going to be talking more about is Detroit. And I no longer live there. I live up here with everybody else. Does everybody here live here, or are there several people? Yeah. Okay. So Detroit. So you're up from Detroit right now? Sweet. So we all kind of share what I'm going to be talking about here. And, you know, part of this whole idea of the portrait of Michigan and what makes us all who we are, you know, it's a lot of our environment. It's a lot of the way that we've been brought up. And I was raised in Detroit, and I was raised in Detroit in a family that was photographically oriented, for which I was lucky. I always knew that. But let's get on here a little bit. But I was a product of a family that had a lot of camera gear and things because of my great grandfather. And it's only recent, you know, I heard the stories in my family about who he was and what he did, and that he was kind of a dandy guy, and he went through money quick. You know, money came to him, and he spent it. He lived his life. You know, he enjoyed his life, is what I'm told. And anyway, he emigrated from Germany in the late 1840s to escape conscription in the Kaiser over there. He kind of saw the writing on the wall early on and came to this country. And as I'm told, he married a woman, an American bohemian woman of marriage of convenience to get over here, and then divorced and separated once he got here. And so he was already kind of in that artistic mode. And being a photographer, it's just really interesting how apples don't fall far from trees, and the fact that I did not know any of this. I mean, I knew he was a photographer, right? And I had pictures around the house of my grandmother and cabinet cards, as you can see here, from the family, but I didn't really know the extent of it. So I had a good friend of mine, Bill McGraw, who comes up later in this talk. He's was a reporter for the Detroit Free Press for years, and he's one of my best friends, and he knows how to get information, believe me. And so I had him go find some things about my great grandfather, and this is what came up. We got his obituary here, which turns out is written by my grandmother. And so I find out a lot here, that he basically spanned the history of photography. He started off doing daguerreotypes, and he moved on up through glass plates and, you know, salt printing and all the kinds of things that I do, not knowing that he did these things. And he was very also entrepreneurial oriented, which I am also, because being a photographer, you're always looking for a way to make a living in some way. And fortunately, I was able to couple with my personal work. I was able to couple a pretty successful career commercially. And then once I started doing things on my own, I started marketing my own work in certain ways, doing monthly prints, coming up with all these schemes to do things. So These is some of his work here, and this was his studio for his studio staff. He was at 53 Monroe, which any of you know Detroit is right next to the National Theater, which still stands. But his building was torn down around 1980, and I actually made it down there for, or not, sorry, about 89, and I actually made it down there for the raising of the building, and took some photographs of which I don't have here. But I did see up in the top floor where he was skylights where his studio was, because it was all glassed over, as far as I've been told. And my grandmother would tell me stories about going up on the roof and dropping pebbles on, trying to hit people's top hats from the top of the thing. So it's fascinating stories, but I didn't really know about him personally. So anyway, here we go. We're talking about he finds this ad. So we shall brush down all humbug. Give everybody a nice good look down with photographs, 12 cards for $1 at Lutke's Gallery, so 53 Monroe Avenue. So yeah, the parallels are kind of stunning and striking that I didn't know these things. And once again, I mean, we're not only product of our environment, we're product of our genes, I suppose. So, and we'll go on here to see that he not only this, he was West End working men hold mass meet. Fred Lutke opened the meeting with a stirring address in German, in which he urged those present to study their own interests with fidelity and zeal. Mr. Lutke animadverted at considerable length on the evils of overwork and the tendency of laborers through fear of losing their income to accept less than was right in the rate of wages. So I also find out that apples don't fall far from the tree in this way, and that I'm kind of cursed with this leftist sort of, I wouldn't say leftist, but this left of center kind of idea of people's, lives. You shouldn't, the reason I'm a photographer is because I didn't want to work too hard, I suppose. So, and I have, don't get me wrong. I've been a plumber, I've been all kinds of things, but this is very interesting to find this out after all this time. So, and I also found out that he ran for mayor or whatever it was of his district where he lived. This was on the east side of Detroit, east of East Grand Boulevard, on Sheridan Street is where my family, and there was a big German community and mostly spoke German at the time. And from what I know about my grandfathers, he documented most of the early German immigrants and their families and things. So anyway, I am made in Detroit. So on to my own work now. Photography was always a big part of our lives and big part of my life. My father had cameras, my uncles had cameras. There was always photo gear around. I remember what an enlarger looked like before I knew how it worked. Those kind of things. So there was always this around me, and I kind of gravitated toward this. My dad would always go out and we would go on trips, and he wouldn't let me touch his cameras, but I would draw pictures. I would draw pictures of cameras and cut them out, and then I would take pictures with those cameras, and I would draw the pictures, and I would have the photographs drawn completely with the borders and everything. And it was a bit obsessive. So, I come by what I do, honestly. That's the thing. So anyway, I started photographing in Detroit. I went through school, Central Michigan University. As I said, I worked as a plumber for a while, and I tried to find a real way to make a living, but always was this calling to do this work. And at that time, it was a much more viable career to be a photographer. So I decided finally to quit my plumbing job, and I did my gap years after high school, and I decided to go back to school and go to school for art and photography in particular. So a landscape photographer at heart, and coming from Michigan, we come by that honestly as well. It's one of the most beautiful states in the country. And I do a lot of landscape work, but here I am coming out of school, and I come back to Detroit to live and make my living, and I don't have much landscape to work with. So the city became my landscape. And I realized that I didn't have to go anywhere else to make art. I could make art right in my own city, and my city was quite a beautiful place, although I was looking at it with glazed over eyes, I suppose. As Detroit wasn't such a great place. Detroit was falling apart from the time I was born. I was born in 1959. Population was already dropping. People often say that it was because of the uprising in '67 that people left the city, but they didn't. The city was already dwindling in population from the '50s on. We were at 2 million people at one point, and now Detroit's around 675,000. So, there's going to be some blight and there's going to be some problems. But anyway, I was focused on the beauty of the city and the spirit of the city, because as you all know that grown up in Detroit, it can bring tears to your eyes when you start to talk about the city, even though it might be a shithole, it's our shithole, and nobody else better talk bad about it. So anyway, I once again, I started looking for the beauty in the city, and I started to work, this was Belle Isle was one of the first places I started to really work concentrated in the city. This was a sculpture there that I believe is still there by a Detroit artist named John Pyatt, who's not with us any longer. Strange thing about this was I made this photograph quite long ago, right out of school, and I ended up later on in life sharing a studio with this John Pyatt down in the Atlas Building in Detroit, which was a real strange thing. We're flipping through my photographs one day, and he sees this and he goes, "Oh my God, that's mine." And I said, "What?" And he goes, the sculpture. And I was like, "Holy crap!" So weird how these things happen. You probably all notice this now, is that, and you live long enough, that strange occurrences happen and strange, couplings happen throughout life. And I'm not really so sure that they're all, random. But anyway, so this is what I was doing in Detroit. I was making images that I thought were gorgeous and that I thought were, I mean, not, I thought my city was gorgeous. And that's what I focused on. My camera was always focused on that. And I was working on that. Now, even as Detroit was becoming more and more abandoned, in this area here, we've got the Metropolitan Building on the right, completely abandoned, everything completely abandoned. But I was still, making, I was influenced heavily by pictorialist photographers, Edward Steichen, people like that. And so I was making those kind of images of Detroit at that time. And at the time I was doing this, I was being somewhat criticized by people because I wasn't, I was kind of looking at it with rose-colored glasses. And there was other photography going on at that time that was just ruin-oriented. And there were people coming from all over the world just photographing the ruins of Detroit. And to me, I thought that was a real disservice to us, because that, I thought, was what the world would perceive us as, which is what they did. But my idea was to continually actually, so this was part of my idea. This is Barry Sanders here, a big thing that went up on the walls down there, and then quickly became a ghost, a ghost sign that lasted for years. I mean, when I made this image, Barry Sanders was probably a grandfather by now. But anyway, so I just kept focusing on what I thought was the beauty of the city as it was deteriorating underneath me and us. So I just loved the old architecture, and I loved the old buildings. And this is the Book Tower, which has now once again been revitalized and is vibrant once again, with people living in it and shops and things. But at this point, it was just a shell of, I think that Gilbert bought this building for $40,000 or something like that. But again, I was focusing on things that were showing life in the city. And so in something like this, you've got this, but you've still got these lit windows here. And so there is somebody there. And, Woodmere Cemetery, I'm showing you a cross section of thousands of images that I've done over the years, so things that are particularly Detroit. Woodmere Cemetery is one of those places for me that I would go to, because later on finding out that my great grandfather, who I've talked about with you, was buried here. Is buried here, unmarked grave, but he's in there. I kind of know where he is. Once again, the Book Tower, all of these things, I just saw the beauty in them. And as you can see, everything's dark. It's like everybody left. And there were a few years there when I was working in the city where that's what it was like. I mean, we were, this may be in the late 2000s, something like that. But, I've started as early as, the early 1990s when I was doing this. This I threw in here because it's particularly poignant now, because we've gone through, this was probably photographed in the mid 1990s when I was going in there, and I was exploring it and photographing it as as a piece of a landscape. And having been in there as a child and dropped off my grandparents to go places and picked up people here, when I first went in here, when it was in this state, I just can't explain the feeling of it. I mean, it's like being in a in a cathedral, and that nobody's been in for years, but scrappers and things in it. And it was just so disheartening to see this happening to the city. And so this is, I was aware of what was going on, but I was still not trying to exploit it.
That's the train station, right?
Yeah, that's the train station. And soon I'll go down and I'll get an after picture of this. But yeah, it was pretty crazy and terrible in there, and scary and somewhat dangerous. So here we go. Now we're going to get back to, now here's another thing, is that I started to work, I was working as a city photographer for Dearborn. I got hired by them, and I became kind of the mayor's photographer, and I was doing a lot of these, it was grip and grins and city things, legal things, events, that kind of thing. And I did that for quite some time. And I was getting away from my personal work, and I really wanted to continue to work. But once again, I felt I needed to go somewhere else to make my art. Laying in bed, I was very close to the Rouge plant, and I'm listening to that Rouge plant at night, not being able to sleep, and had bad insomnia because I was just so conflicted. I was working as a photographer, but I was not doing what I was doing. So anyway, I just decided to get up, go out with my camera. And this is kind of the beginning of me really starting to photograph in earnest at night, because I realized that at night, light was really no different. There was an infinite amount range of tones between white and black, and in the dark, as long as I left my shutter open long enough. And so I started to become a night creature. And at first I started around the Rouge plant in Dearborn, near where I lived. And once again, coupled with history of Detroit and my desire to make the images that I kind of perceived as, more of a pictorial view of Detroit. This was a great time to do it, at night. It was really wonderful because I could go to these places and they're abandoned, and, nature is around me. There were pheasants, there were, a few rats and wild dogs and things like that. But I had a great time doing this, and I would go out every night and work. And, I just, first along the Rouge River corridor, and the anchored by the Ford Rouge plant. And then I did a lot of study of the history around there. And, I got into areas where I would get kicked out and things. And then, I would carry photographs with me to show security people when they were, wanting me to leave. But I was just trying to make beauty out of everything that was there. And just having the time of my life, because it was like wandering through the woods. It was, it's hard to explain, but you're as alone out there as you would be, in the woods. So all of this kind of anchored around here, and this just became my thing. So I just kept going and kept going at it. And one of the things that Jerry Spagnoli was here talking about the other night, he's got a few years on me as well, and he's still out working all the time. And it all has to do with momentum as well. You just have to keep working. You have to keep going with it. You can't give up for any length of time, because you can be complacent with that and then not do what you're supposed to be doing. And to me, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So I was going along and I was finding all kinds of places. I was, safe oriented, but like I said, there's not many people around. So if there was somebody out there that was threatening to me, I knew where they were long before they got to me. You can hear, it's like I say, it's like being in the woods. You can hear things way off, and what's going on. And, you're just way more hyper vigilant and hyper aware of your surroundings when you're potentially in danger. So anyway, so I would find all these really interesting places that were, I would compose them in my head, and I would find places like this where you would never think of making twice to make an image in here. But that's what I started to do. It just became my palette, and I was working with it in that way. A lot of the old industry that was there, a lot of this is now gone. The blast furnaces are still there, but the stacks that I showed you before, that's all been taken away now. The stacks were sold to a Chinese company someplace and put on a barge and sent over. These stacks, the power plant, that's all gone now. So anyway, it was, part of photographing that was not only getting my yayas out and exploring and things, it was having a connection with the history of the area. So then comes Belle Isle. Belle Isle also became that for me. There was a period there for several years where I was at Belle Isle probably 4 nights out of the week. And I'd go down there between, say 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. to work when there was really nobody around. And I mean, not even police bothered me. It was crazy. It was just so abandoned. But once again, I was just looking for, part of the history coupled with the beauty of it. And it's the observatory. And now, if any of you have any questions or even, memories of some of the images that I'm showing at this point, you're welcome to jump in and share. Now, again, I called it the Casino Bridge. This was down in Belle Isle. This is one of my earliest ones. I'd go down in foggy, crazy, misty nights and things and just wander and, make images with my tripod and my camera. I was photographing with a Hasselblad. That's why they're square format. I always found that, to me, composing with a horizontal, I very rarely do verticals. Composing with a horizontal was fairly easy for me, but composing with a square was quite difficult. So that just became another challenge of mine when I was photographing with a square format camera, and I did that for years, to the point now where even though when I photograph digitally, I'm still photographing in the square. Now this is Snow Dog, one of my most, if you call it iconic images. It's been published everywhere, and this was part of the history of the island too, and spoke to the city as well, because this was a newspaper boy statue that was put at a specific picnic shelter that was called it was to celebrate the newsboys, and there was a newsboy on there, and somebody had knocked him off with a sledgehammer. He'd been busted off, and he was gone, but the dog was there. But it just seemed so forlorn and like he was waiting for something. And the way the night was and the snow was blazing at me, it just made this image that, I don't know, I can still remember making it, but it's one of those things that becomes more than you, because it gets out there into the world and people see it, that you look at it after a while and it's kind of like not you anymore. But anyway, yeah, it does. Yeah, that always got the people thought it was a graphic, they thought it was a drawing, they thought all kinds of things. So it just, that mystery also added to it. It's still there, but it's been repaired. The boy's back. So and that was 1996 or 1994. So that's what, 40 years, 30 years, a long time ago. This was a little bit later. This was in the early 2000s. I used to go down there every year, and any of you have been at Belle Isle, you knew that they did this with the trees there, where they would turn it into an ice sculpture by spraying water up into it. So this was just one of those years that I went down there and photographed it. Belle Isle again, they had finally got to the point where they had refurbished the Scott Fountain to the point where it was working again. And so that was a big thing for me, going down there and actually photographing water coming out of it, because I've been photographing it for years just as in its fallow state. Because everything on Belle Isle had gotten pretty bad. And it's getting better now, as far as I know. The state's taken over as a state park. This was all part of that whole thing as well. The lagoons used to be surrounded by these beautiful willow trees that a lot of them have gotten mature and passed away now. Once again, the city from Belle Isle. I would go out there and, at nights there'd be snow covered, and there were deer on the island. They hadn't corralled them all yet. And so I'd be photographing at a scene, and all of a sudden everything in the scene would get up and shake off the snow and walk away. I had that happen a lot. It was really wild. There's the Carolyn Tower there. So anyway, it's my love affair with the city, and I loved it, and I didn't want to show anything bad about it, and then I started to kind of fall off of it, and I wasn't really interested in that much, but I wasn't photographing as much. But then, Tiger Stadium, before they closed it down and tore it down, I ended up getting a job from Fox Sports. They were building a new corporate building in Los Angeles, and they hired me to do this. They wanted me to decorate the corporate floor, where all the executives were, the top floor. So they commissioned me to go around. I spent 3 months traveling all over the country photographing stadiums. The thing that we conceived of was to make the stadiums the portrait. And it was the whole project was called In the Shadows of Legends. And I went around and I photographed all these stadiums in my style at night. And Detroit Tiger Stadium was one of the stadiums that they had given me to photograph, which was just a dream for me because I got to spend basically a week in there at night in the wintertime. And I would go back every night and photograph. And they just gave me the run of the place. It was really wonderful. I'd go down there about midnight and then I'd leave about 6 in the morning. It was really cold, but the only place that was heated was up in the press box. So you could go up in the press box and sit. And a friend of mine, Lowell Blalou, who's a real well-known Detroit painter, he came with me a few nights and we would take a bottle of whiskey and go up and sit in the press box and just, you'd sit there looking out at Tiger Stadium and it was snowing and it's dark, no lights on, no nothing. It was just an amazing experience, having a couple of shots of whiskey and then go walking around and wandering and photographing and stuff. So it was a great time. And so these were a lot of old artifacts of Tiger Stadium that, we all would have remembered, the turnstiles and things. And looking out into, the snow on the thing, but I'm up in the upper decks looking out at the field. There's countless of these. I just showed you a little bit of them. This one I call Home Run Alley. This was out in in right field where the line, you just can imagine how many balls dropped in there from over the years. And anyway, the stadium is a little bit of rust over here. It's falling apart and stuff, but it still was quite a place. And, I found my way all over the place. I found a trap door up in the ceiling and I climbed through the trap door and it took me out on the roof. And, I didn't have anybody with me, so I could go anywhere I wanted to. So I was up on the roof. I've got some incredible things of these with the train station in the background that I couldn't find the images, but with all these lighting structures from the roof and the Michigan Central station out there. And just, to me now, priceless stuff, This was probably one of the more known ones of that one. So anyway, I installed this whole show out at it was a big deal. They put a lot into it. It was like a whole year of my life. And, all of it was framed here in Michigan. It was all created and shipped out there via air. And then I had to go out there and set it up with a group and had a big opening and Rupert Murdoch came to the opening and just this little guy that, I've come to despise since, but so it goes. It was a good deal and I was happy to spend his money. So and I did many other stadiums. I went all over the place, football stadiums, wherever there were, the only one I couldn't do was Yankee Stadium because at the time it was starting to fall apart and they wouldn't allow me in. Fenway Park, Wrigley Field, all those kind of things. So now after all of these years, we're kind of winding up here and I'll go through this next area fairly quickly. I won't. But what was happening was Detroit was falling apart and it was dying under our noses. And I had stopped photographing it. We had moved up here, or we were getting ready to move up here. A lot of things were happening. So it was around 2015. Friends of mine were after me to photograph Detroit. Why have you stopped? And I was criticized a lot because I wasn't photographing what was actually going on, and I didn't really know how to attack that or how to approach that at all, but one night my wife she saw in the newspaper that somebody was going to refurbish one of the Bob Lowe boats. So how many of you knew what the Bob Lowe boat was? Yeah, see, we've all been in it. And it was going to be brought upriver and it was going to be put in a place where it could be safe, but also they could work on restoring it. And I knew where that was because I'd been doing everything along that river for so long. So I knew exactly where they were going to have it. So I went out one night and it was just this foggy, misty night. And I went out there and sure enough, I come around the corner where it was and there it is, this big behemoth. And I photographed it for a few nights, but then this one night, this one happened here. Where it was just amazing across the river with the snow and it there and lit like that. And it just bang, it hit me like a sledgehammer. This was the way for me to photograph Detroit now, was to be honest about it and photograph it from a personal standpoint, where I thought we had this ship here where everybody of a certain age in Detroit had been on this ship at one time or another, going over to the Bob Lowe Island to have fun with their family and this and that. So this, it just reeked of history. And you know, the ghosts on this ship. So it just hit me, you know, this is the way to photograph Detroit now, is to photograph the ghosts of Detroit. And so what I did is I started to like think of it as a collective idea and go around and photograph the city itself in its current state, but to photograph it with a spirit of hope and that kind of thing in it. And so, you know, what I was doing is I was going around to all these abandoned neighborhoods and things, and I would find the one or two houses where somebody was still hanging on and still trying to live in there. And I was photographing the signs of life in that area. And not only that, doing a portrait of the neighborhoods and a portrait of the buildings and of what was left. So I was thinking of the buildings themselves as animate objects, not as, you know, ruins. And that's what became the next, this was 2015. This became, you know, the next 2 years of my life, along with my friend Bill McGraw, who I mentioned earlier. Bill was um, a, a, uh, a reporter for the Detroit Free Press. And so he knew the history of Detroit, and he knew everywhere we went. So what he did is he rode shotgun for me. So he not only kept his eye on me, and he would be my eyes when I was out, because a lot of these areas were still pretty dangerous. He would also bring it to life for me. He would tell me the history of things that happened, like, you know, who was murdered in this building and whatever, you know, and it just like, whoa, it just brought it to this amazing thing. So the ghosts just all came alive for me. So we spent, you know, a couple years going out a couple nights a week, and we started thriving on it, you know. You know, it was great. We're going out tonight, you know. So this one you can't see so well. This is an old gas station that's gone feral. There's a lot of Detroit had gone feral at the time. You know, this was back in 2015s. This was like at the height of the bankruptcy and before everything started to turn around a bit, of which it has a lot in the more concentrated areas, but in these neighborhoods where I'm showing these, it hasn't been so fortunate. You know, it still remains like this. And the city is taking care of a lot of things and tearing down a lot of the blight, but it just continues to grow all the time. Oops, sorry there. So so again, I just went around to all these places, and I would just sneak around. And you know, my son called me the stealth photographer. I started off taking him with me. He was very young. He was a lot younger at the time, and it probably wasn't the best thing for me to be taking him out doing these things. But it was really cool. I'm sure he's going to have a lot of memories of this. So, you know, I was just finding places where people lived and where people were hanging on. And, you know, this is in relation to industry that's grown up around the places. It's the one last house left. This is along Buchanan in Detroit, which became one of my favorite thoroughfares in Detroit. It's like kind of parallels Michigan Avenue, but it was kind of the original thoroughfare through Detroit. And it was beautiful neighborhoods, but largely empty and constantly being razed. So the idea was just to, you know, photograph the life of it without it being there. This is up in the Brightmoor area. This area was a thriving neighborhood, even 10 years prior to this. But things just started to happen, and, you know, people moved out. People couldn't afford the homes. They were wood frame homes. It was an area that was built around the post-war, and it wasn't built very well. So a lot of these buildings fell into disrepair, and then they were torn out. So you've got this skeleton of a neighborhood here. So the thing that was fascinating to me now is that you could start to see the landscape in Detroit. You started to see the hills and the valleys and things that you didn't notice when it was all built up. So here we've got this area of Brightmoor, where there was probably, you know, a couple hundred homes in here. And then they're just all gone. And you didn't even notice them disappearing. You just drove by one day and it's all gone. So there's all the wires are hanging here, attaching to nothing. And probably nothing that will ever be again, you know. I mean, considering that 2 million people now are 1.5 million people are gone. So this is Horatio Street. This is up also around the Buchanan area of Detroit. It's really one of my favorite places. And now what I'm hearing, you know, the thing is that it's been progressing in this area. A lot of these have been torn down, and now what I'm hearing is that some pretty substantial homes are being built in this area. You know, people with actual money are coming in and building places, not just a church building a neighborhood of you know, whatever half-assed homes or something. They're actually real, you know, people that bought a whole block. So now they've got an acre of Detroit to work with. So This is down around the Del Rey area, which is now pretty much gone because of the new bridge. I haven't been here in quite some time. This is along Jefferson. Not getting oh, there we go. Okay, so here we're getting into even more blighted areas, places where people shouldn't be living, but obviously we've got some people living in here. You know, that's what became even scarier for me, was to find out that, you know, there were people living in some of these places with visqueen over the windows at, you know, on 10 below zero nights. This is another sign of things coming around. This is in my dad's old neighborhood, around Sheridan Street. And, you know, here we've got the building with the ladder going up on the top, and, you know, somebody living in there. And, you know, so things are starting to turn around. What's actually happened is things have gotten as worse as they can get. And a lot of the buildings that are kind of left at this point are buildings that are going to be, you know, considered for saving. You know, somebody's painted up their porch real nice, and, you know, they got no neighbors, they have nothing, but they're there. Another sign of, you know, I mean, a baseball diamond that hasn't been played on in 40 years. So all these things became, you know, I mean, this is right around the time when I left Detroit. I don't know if it was part of my, you know, cutting myself off from it, but I did really start to see it for what it was, and tried to show the beauty. But again, it's pretty hard. You know, I mean, when things are so, you know, this is like a portrait of an old man, seen better days. And that stuff was endless, you know. You know, and so things like this, where, you know, we've got a building that people are still living in, and you know, just still trying to make pretty images of the city, but not having much to okay. So Hotel Yorba, this is another you know, it's starting to come around. You know, I mean, here we've got young professionals have moved into the place now, and you know, this neighborhood around Yorba is starting to become one of those neighborhoods where people have bought the big old homes and they've done some restoration on them, or they didn't need restoration. But the problem being is that these areas now, there's been people living in there for years and years and years, and now younger people are coming in with money, and it raises the tax base, and then it forces people out. So there's always that happening. You know, much the same kind of thing. Now I started this off too. Another part of the project was starting off because I was starting to follow my great grandfather's things, and I found his locations of his own old studios. And in the later part of his life, he had moved to a studio on Wesson off Michigan Avenue in Detroit, Wesson and Buchanan, where I really liked. And I don't have it in here, but I tracked down the building, and I tracked it down and I photographed it a week before they tore it down. Yeah, it was pretty amazing. So this is down in Jefferson, Delray area. This is a whole, not only a neighborhood, but a whole city pretty much that was just decimated, wiped out. And now I'm assuming that most of this is gone now. Now here's back from the neighborhood. So we're talking about the train station from the other side where everything has been refurbished and everything. This is the back side of it when, you know, this is back maybe 2004, 2015, 2016, somewhere in there, before they'd even started to consider doing it in the building. But what they had done is they'd gone to the Maroon family who owned the building, and they'd made them put glass back on the windows. And what they did is they just covered them with kind of a thin layer of acrylic. So you can see that acrylic reflecting off there. But the building is still completely abandoned and, you know, in terrible shape. What they've done to it in the last 7 years is completely amazing. So another thing I didn't explain when this title of this project was Detroit Where We Used to Live. Because of the internet and Facebook and things, I was posting these images as it was happening, as I was making them. And it became a real big deal. People were contacting me from all over the world. And a lot of people were contacting saying me, you know, can you check on my dad was born here, my grandparents were here, whatever. And it was amazing. And I started going around to different properties, and some of them I could find, some of them I couldn't, they were gone. But the fact that there were so many people out in the world that used to be from Detroit or had family that used to be from Detroit. And so that's where the project name came from, Detroit, where we used to live, because I was getting more attention from people that used to live in Detroit than people that were in Detroit. You know, here we go once again, you know, somebody's living in there. But, you know, it's getting to the point now where, like I say, buildings were left. There was people with pride in their house. They were keeping them up. You know, here's this piece of property would be extremely valuable and probably is now, you know, with the bridge view and everything. But that was part of the idea too, is that I noticed, sorry, back to digress, back when I was talking about my grandfather's studio, I noticed that from some of his places where he would have walked down Michigan Avenue or gotten on the streetcar to go down Michigan Avenue, he would have views of the bridge, all over the place and views of that area of town. And so I just started thinking about the places that he would have seen. And that's what's kind of started part of this project as well, as areas that, you know, you could see the bridge from everywhere in town. And now what I'm being told is that the new bridge has become one of those things where you can see it from places where I couldn't even imagine you would be able to see the bridge. So anyway, another feral streets, you know, there's so many of these in Detroit that had just gone. You know, I mean, there's nothing on the house, nothing on the street, no reason to keep the infrastructure going, but yet they powered up the street lights. You know, and this is frightening because this is 5 miles from where I live, you know, I mean, it's amazing. I would start to have dreams, like I would dream that I woke up and I opened my front door and my neighborhood had become this, you know. So here's something, you know, photographing the same neighborhood, you know, same type of building, you know, somebody had turned this into a little church. But, you know, not a block away, oops, shit, sorry, not a block away, we've got very similar buildings, same situation. It's gone completely feral. So, but signs of hope. Uh, oh, young people got in with groups. They bought lots of property. They started doing urban farming. So this is a barn for an urban farm around the, you know, the north end area, which would be north of the boulevard, east of the Fisher Building, and see what they've done here. Built a very viable little farm, and what they've started to do is they, you know, people from the neighborhood can come and work in there, and they can take crops from there, and they can benefit from it. So it's really become quite a big deal. There's the Golden Tower right there in the background. Now this, not for a piece of blight, but this is in that area. And so this is how they're using buildings in the area. Right behind this is where this farm is. And this building, they were in the process of dismantling it. They weren't just tearing it down, they were dismantling it piece by piece because they were using the wood for other things. And what they were doing is they were turning the basement into a cistern that they could use for housing water for running the farm. And so, you know, signs of life, people are finding these older houses and they're refurbishing them, but they're still there alone, but they're paying good money for them, and they're spending, you know, time refurbishing them, and it's happening. You know, I mean, there's some really beautiful places that have been saved. And so, you know, I kind of wanted to close this out with a little bit of hope to show you that things are going. And now this is, again, I've been gone for 8 years and I have not been working in the city. So I'm expecting my next foray down there to find even better things happening. Beautiful little buildings. You know, decent cars, nice cars out in front now. And, you know, so this was part of a project that I did. I moved up here before it really started to gel. And this gallery in Toronto got a hold of me. It's funny, you can't get arrested in your own city, right? So the gallery in Toronto saw this developing. They said, man, we'd love to show this. So I had this thing. This was my poster that I came up with. You know, in the woods where I used to live, Detroit. They didn't really like it. So this is the poster they ended up going with, which, you know, I suppose was much more, you know, appropriate. And they knew what they were doing. It was one of these things where I went to the show and I'm across the street from the gallery. A friend of mine from Toronto came and took me to the bar across the street. And I thought, geez, there's nobody here. There's nothing. There was nobody. So anyway, we're in this bar, we're drinking for like an hour, and then my friend Dinesh goes out and he comes back and he goes, "Hey, we got to go." I said, "No, let's just stay here. There's nobody there." And he goes, "No, we got to go." And I come out in the front door and there was a line coming out of the front of the gallery and the place was packed. So it was like, wow, it just like it happened. It just, it had been on the radio. People came out in droves and it was great. It was kind of fun, but to be accepted in another place. That's another thing about Detroit. Detroit loves to hate itself. So, you have to go somewhere else to become known to before they'll accept you. So this is one of the shots that Bill did of me. He always had my back. And so I'd go out there on the street and I'd be photographed and I'd be talking to him the whole time. I go, "We okay? We okay? What about that?" I'd hear a sound. I go, "Is that somebody coming?" "Nope, nope, you're cool." And he goes, "Oh, now I can see somebody about 2 blocks away. You got time." And we'd jump back in the car and we'd be gone. And a couple of times I'd hear people yelling at me at night, like, "What are you doing over there?" "Nope, nothing, just taking pictures. Don't worry," yelling off into the dark at something. But it was a great time. And that's about it. Thanks very much. Now, thank you. You can always go to my website and find things, get on my subscription list. But really, I invite everybody that's here in the summertime. I run these things up there and we try to have a lot of fun with old time processes. And, like Sheila said before, I've kind of found a way to marry the old ways with the new ways and been having a really great time and really been teaching a lot of people the process. And tends to be people of our age that are more interested in these things, now. But a lot of the younger people are coming on board with it too. I mean, it's much more fun to create imagery with your hands than it is to just push buttons and stuff. So, anybody have any questions? Oh, fantastic. Well, let's go with you first.
So I'm also a Detroit Metro
Y-
Detroit transplant.
yeah.
How do you distinguish between what you're doing with ruin porn?
And that was it, is that I didn't think of it as ruin porn. I think it's probably it's maybe in my own mind where it comes from. But yeah, I mean, some of the ruin porn that was there, is a lot different than this. If you could see it, there's really no life to it. There's no context to it. I think that having somebody that has a history with it and has some context to put it in, because that's what happens is so many people come from around the world just because they're ruin seekers, but they have no concept, no concept of what happened, no concept of why this happened. There's a lot of lessons to be learned there that aren't being taught through the ruin porn thing. And that's why I don't think of it as the same way. But again, it's something that I would have to explain maybe. But I think that if I ever do the book that I'm supposed to do of this thing, that you'll see the transition of it and and how it isn't, and how it mixes with the new things. There's things that I didn't show, like going into the Brush Park where, they've taken some of those old mansions, and they've completely redone them and they're incredible. And so that's all part of it as well. So anyway, yeah, you?
I was just wondering if you could go back to Detroit and take pictures of the downtown area now where it's all changed. I mean.
Yeah, I would like to. I mean, I avoided that in the first place, a lot of that anyway. Just because I was more interested in the neighborhoods, I was more interested in the life of people and where they lived and things. But yeah, I would definitely like to do that. And there were parts of this project where I did photograph. I went into like Michigan Palace and places where they had turned an old theater into a parking garage. And a lot of those things had been seen in pop culture a lot, quite frequently anyway. And I just found out that I was biting off way more than I could chew. And the idea of this project was not to be a document. It was more to be an allegory. It was more to be a story and a narrative of something rather than a hard document of it. So I kind of started to avoid photographing things like that. I mean, I really would like to go down there and enjoy it, but I don't think that photographically it really holds much interest to me other than, putting a cap on this project.
After.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot that I've thought about continuing on. I mean, there's a lot of other things that are happening in Detroit that are different, with populations changing and styles of architecture. Like you got younger people coming in and it's just living in different ways, like lighting things at night. Like Dearborn now, when I go back to where I live, it's like the popular thing is to put soffit lights every 5 feet around your house. So it just glows. Like you can't sleep in your house because it can't get dark enough, And that's something that's completely new. And those are the kind of things that I'm interested in as well. Another thing that I'm interested in is the idea of replacing neighborhoods with McMansions and things, small buildings, you know, like buying 2 lots and putting in a big house and, you know, and it seems to be happening in Detroit as well.
Right now, we sold property on our church, because our church is going downhill.
Yeah.
And this guy built, I mean, I've never seen anything so.
Yeah, there's amazing things. I mean, on my street, I lived on Colson and this was, you know, I hadn't lived there in 25 years ago. They were doing that in Dearborn where it was like, you know, there wasn't a lot of people building new things. So when people did want to build something, they kind of let them do what they wanted. So they were like completely like wiping out property. They would build a house property line to property line, you know, and there's no grass, there's no nothing. And, you know,
I grew up in the far west side of Detroit.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I was just walking around the neighborhood, they were just, you know,
yeah,
all nice houses.
yeah.
And now
They're getting huge. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the original, you know, like, yeah, I mean, it is a cultural thing to a degree, but it's also a property thing, and people like to live in big things. I mean, like, we live in an area up here, like, it baffles me where wealth comes from. You know, I mean, how can people continue to be building $3-4 million homes, you know, and put one up for sale and then it sells next week? You know, I mean, where does all that come from? I don't really understand it.
our rectory house and our sexton's house, because then people go driving down Cherry Hill could see.
Yeah, yeah, and he's got the money to do it, you know. It's funny, you know, and like, why there? But you know, people like to do what they like to do, and you know, and part of this project too shows you that nothing ever stays and nothing ever lasts. So, you know, where's that going to go? You know, like when you know, how many people are out there that can purchase something like that? Yeah. So is that our next blight? You know, mansions that people can't fill? I don't know. Yes. They tend to be. I mean, a lot of my, you know, it was born out of necessity in the beginning because I had to have a job. You know, I was working during the day. And what I found out from, you know, some of my earliest night photographs were that people responded to them because it wasn't the way that people normally saw things, you know. And so showing it in a different light like that, or absence of light, really seemed to bring more attention to it as well. And then it also started to help me kind of inform you, the viewer, of what it is that I'm trying to do. You know, it gives me a completely different time. It takes something that's familiar to us all, but it takes it out of context in a way and lets me do other things with it. You know, and the coupling of point sources of light and atmosphere and all those things combine to give you things to work with at night that you don't have to work with in the day, you know. I mean, many of those images that I made, had I made them at high noon, you know, they wouldn't have the impact emotionally or anything on them. So that's part of it. But then I just became to love it, you know, and I just like how it slows things down. You know, to me, a documentary photograph can be a split second of something, but you know, a lot of life isn't like that. And the way that I see things aren't perfectly sharp from corner to corner, you know, like I'm looking at Heidi and she's in focus and you're all just off there in the ether someplace when I'm looking at her. And so I like to photograph that way. And at night, it helps me do that too, because I can open the lens up and I can do a lot of selective focus. And so I just like to do that way. And I also like passage of time, you know, exposures of mine will very often have some movement in there somewhere, whether it's the clouds or in water or something, more natural images. I don't have any of the natural things to show you because I was focusing on Detroit, but you know, I tend to go for capturing of time rather than a moment. And so what I'll do now in my daylight images, like I lead these trips and I take people out, and I'm not going to take people out at night very often because it's, you know, liability and all those kind of things. But I have neutral density filters and things that I can put on my camera so I can slow things way down. Like say a 10-stop neutral density filter, I can put one downtown here and shoot a 30-second exposure and people can move throughout that image and they don't even show up in the image, you know. But it gives me some movement of time. So I tend to photograph in the daytime a lot like that as well. So I kind of simulate nighttime imagery when I'm shooting in the day. long question to it, long answer to a short question. I'm sorry, yeah, go. Yes. Yes. Oh, yeah, yeah, oh, yeah. Yeah, nothing I don't, other than the color. See, so the color thing was a departure for me as well. And that was another thing to separate kind of my new work from my older work. And then digitally, there's a lot of things that are available to you that aren't, just making that project at night, digitally made it more possible for me than it would have with film. Because I can shoot in a format that's called RAW, where it just takes in information just like on a negative, but I can bring things out of those images, things I can pull up out of the shadows that are there, but you just don't see them. So I can pull them and I can adjust that image so that it's such that you can see things. Yeah, and I like that. I like the challenge of the color too, because I've never been a color photographer. So that was it, it was kind of a departure for me. So it was quite purposely done that way. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, and almost all of my work now, I go through all these trips and things, and I photograph in color now because I am photographing digitally. I mean, I still use film from time to time. But for doing what I do when I'm traveling, it's much less labor intensive to do it the way that I'm doing it. But I still see it in black and white. I still transfer it. I still print it in black and white. Um, I can make big, beautiful color images because they're there, but there's enough people doing that. I like to do what I do with them. So I very often use my mind's eye when I'm photographing out there. I see what I want to see and I see what I know I can do, not what's actually in front of me. So yeah, I still shoot black and white in my head. Yeah,
In your last segment, you had two different photos of very dilapidated houses, and the background was red traffic lights.
yeah,
And did you deliberately avoid shooting a green light, waited for red?
yeah. At times I did. Good catch. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I did. I mean, yeah, definitely. It's part of my whole color sensibility of it too, and also changing the mood of the image.
Yeah.
Something about a green light looks a little bit more positive, and in certain things I was not trying to be positive, I was trying to be real, like I don't even like to look at myself in the mirror anymore, but you got to look at yourself in the mirror, right? You got to look from time to time. And that's what I was doing with it. Yeah. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Anything else? Heidi, I saw you had.
No, the homes look like they're light.
Yeah.
They have portrait quality.
Yeah.
Living quality. And there's so much beauty in the decay.
Yeah.
When you bring that out and you look at it, what does it do for you? I mean, does it change you? Is it like a relationship with the scene?
Yeah, it is. And especially more so after I've made the image, because a lot of these images, like they were impressions, like when you're gesturally drawing and as opposed to really drawing something, my photographs were the gestures and afterward was when I really got to work on them, and so I would see so many things in them afterward than I did before. And that's where that really started to happen, like there's another project I did that I don't know, I haven't done anything with, but it's a drone project that I called Human Stained. And what I did is I did a lot of these things where I went over these buildings above and I photographed them down. You can see toilets spread out this way and something spread out this way. And it's just these stain of what's left of a human life, kind of a thing, and that was one thing that was, that even hit me more, because they're super high detail and I'd look at them and I'd see things in them that were just amazing, and, you know, it does. I get more going with the image afterward than I do than beforehand. And some of them are really, like there's a couple of them weren't even in there. I don't know why Blackstone didn't get in there because it was the exact house I owned at the time. And it was just a couple miles away and it was gone. But I knew exactly it was built by the same architect, if you could call the architect that built those homes. But yeah, it was really weird. And that one really stands out to me because, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and like you say too, is seeing them as people, as experience. you know, because you figure almost every one of these houses, somebody's been born, maybe somebody's died, maybe some horrible things happened, maybe something wonderful's happened, whatever. But, you know, it all lives within that structure, and that structure shows it to you in some way. You know what I mean? It's like, and that's where I get away from kind of the ruin porn thing, is that, you know, there's some context to it, I think, but it might only be in my own head. I don't know, you know, but you're saying that you see things that you know, they're alive. Yeah, and that was my whole purpose of it. Once I saw that boat out there, it all just like that, you know, it just flashed, and it was like, oh my God, now I know how to do this. And so it gave me something to do for a couple of years, you know. That's about it. Thank you very, oh, one more. No, I haven't, but I've heard about it. Yeah, yeah,
Personal point of view for the houses that this person is investigating and living in.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating.
well, and the thing is too, is I've had a lot of firsthand experience with that as well, with people that have done this. You know, my friend Stephen Goodfellow lived in a house that was $4,000, and, you know, you could do anything you wanted with it, and it was really interesting. And, you know, I don't know, it's and other people that have done that, where they've dug into the history of the building and they found out things about it. And it's like, you know, I don't think people did that before. You know, you just buy a new house in Dearborn or in wherever, and, you know, it's got no history. So you're not digging into things. It just doesn't have that same life that something like that does. I was going to make another point on that, but I forgot what it was. Anyway, it'll come up to me later. I really appreciate it. Thanks, you guys. Thanks for asking so many questions. I really appreciate it.